So if you want to use one of the available props, feel free. And if you feel like you're all set with where you are, that works pretty good too. So once we find that comfort within our seat, let's really start to draw in some elongation in the breath. So, setting the physicality of the body first is our primary responsibility. We get the spine vertical, we get the grounding portion of the seat settled, the head placement supported, maybe the eyes closed, maybe they don't, completely up to you. But then we're going to start to slow down the rate of respiration. And then once you feel like you've slowed down that respiration rate, ensure that you've also connected to the depth of the breath so that we're not just taking slow, short breath, but we're taking these slow, full, elongated breaths that allow us to land in the exhale cycle each time through. And we're going to give ourselves 90 more seconds here. And eventually we complete a cycle of breath, let the eyes open if they're closed. And then let's think about locking in the torso so that's very stationary. And start to draw some big circles with your chin. So not horizontal circles, but vertical circles. So taking the chin all the way up and then all the way to one side or the other. And really allowing for some big range of motion, not full range of motion in the neck, right? Because the neck can move in opposite directions, or in other directions, other planes of motion, maybe. And eventually we'll settle back in, completing a cycle and reverse the circular movement. And just thinking about exploring all of those corners until eventually you feel balanced. We'll bring our chin back to neutral and then lift the chin towards the ceiling space. And chin comes back to neutral. And think about pulling and retracting the chin and the skull back. So, really pulling the skull back without tilting the torso. And then imagine that you're lifting the head just a little bit higher, maybe actually physically feel the sensation of lifting your head a little bit higher and see if we can get some of this anterior belly space to be expansive. And then draw your breath into that additional space, even with what might be some tautness in the musculature, and feel the backside of the body changing and expanding. And then as you exhale, don't allow for any collapse. Instead, think about the relaxation of the musculature as an opportunity to get even longer in the spine. Yeah, beautiful. And let's keep that length as we transition to hands and knees tabletop. A lot of ask in a recharge class, right? We've put in quite a bit of engagement here in the front and back side of the torso. Try to keep that as you flip the tops of the feet and settle back into child's pose. Now, if you don't feel like settling all the way into the spinal flexion, you can keep the hands relatively planted and kind of kickstanding you and modify the child's pose to keep the neutrality of the spine while still getting the length. And we'll give ourselves 30 more seconds here, just settling into the child's pose of our choice and really maximizing the availability of length. And then when you're right, we're going to pull forward to tabletop. Drop the right elbow so that it's kind of heart centered and directly underneath, or roughly underneath the heart. The left hand here can stay active, or if it feels accessible, you don't even really need to use it. The right palm can be down or the thumb can be up, again, whatever feels most appropriate. And we are going to turn our gaze towards the left shoulder and then see if we can rotate all the way, the head, the neck, all the way up to gaze towards the ceiling. As you do that, you can think about lifting or neutralizing the torso. Again, you don't really need the arm. The arm can be there. It can provide some stability. It can provide some elevation, but you can do those same things without that left arm. I guess you do need an arm. And then we'll come back to a modified. So left elbow is going to come down to mirror the right, and the right arm is going to come over to its traditional side of the body. Drop the head so the chin comes down to the sternum. And think about softening into the shoulders.
We'll lift the head back to neutral, lift our torso back to traditional tabletop alignment, and settle. And then once you get the settling, left elbow is going to come down roughly heart center-ish. Palm can be up, thumb can be up, whatever feels appropriate for you. And then turning the gaze up and over that right shoulder, maybe staring all the way at the ceiling. That right hand can go wherever feels most appropriate for you. Really, you're looking to balance and stabilize. And then once you're balanced and stabilized, it gives you the best rotation here. And then when you feel balanced left to right, we'll come back to neutral, both arms down, this kind of modified tabletop dolphin, and then dropping the chin once again, softening the shoulders once again. And we're really interacting with the thoracic spine here. So those were big rotations of the neck, of the head, but also got into that thoracic necessity to respond to the cervical spine rotation. So as you're in this dolphin tabletop shape, maybe even a little lateral movement of the shoulders, or maybe even a little lateral movement of the hips to kind of get back in line with the needs of the thoracic spine. And then eventually, when you're feeling right and ready, we're lifting ourselves back up to a tabletop-y shape. Now, be a little bit delicate. We're gonna roll back. We're gonna find down dog. Delicate in response to the thoracic spine. Ideally, we can get the hips back. We can get some thoracic spine lengthening. We may even feel some thoracic spine popping as we create space between the vertebrae. But if your thoracic spine is feeling a little more sticky than normal, make sure you listen to that as well. And then we're going to come back down to hands and knees, and we'll sink back into child's pose. And here, obviously, as all shapes, right? Make your modifications so that it feels best for your practice. I would give in, assuming everything feels good, I would give into the flexion so that your body can just be supported by the thighs, and you can really just let the torso completely relax, even if the hips are a little bit displeased. See if you can use some of that exhale breath landing to relax that anterior hip crease, so that we can get this upper back to just become our integrated friend. And we'll give ourselves 20 more seconds here. So not a ton of time, but enough to really settle. And then when you are ready, we're going to lift ourselves up to tabletop and extend our legs out in front of us. Here, we're going to look for a grip underneath the leg. So we're headed into my favorite fold. This is going to be one of a few times we get in here. So grab opposite elbows, grab opposite wrists, grab opposite fingers. This is going to be a pretty brief trip. So we're just taking ourselves forward into our fold. We have the legs bent enough that we can get pressure and connection between the torso and the thighs. And then head can fall or tuck. It doesn't need to. Totally dependent upon you. Really trying might be the wrong word. We are seeking to access the thoracic spine in this forward fold. So we're trying to take the hamstrings out. That's kind of a necessary requirement to get into the low back. but then we've done so much upper back work. I'm hoping to skip the low back necessity for the moment and get the upper back to relax in this fold. And if you're feeling this all in the low back, that's totally okay. That just means we need to open the low back a little bit more before we get to the upper back. And we're going to attempt that here shortly. And then we'll walk ourselves back up into seat. From seat, from staff, let's bend our left knee. Let the bottom of the left foot come into that inner thigh. Let the lateral edge of the thigh on the left side work its way open. And then just adjust so that your right femur, right kneecap, right toes are pointed straight up. And let's turn our torso just a little rotation, just so the belly button's down the middle of the right thigh, and then fold out over that right thigh. This, we can bend the knee, right? So the right knee can bend, but there is some pretty good right hamstring focus, maybe creeping up into the low back, maybe creeping up into that sacral connection. So there's this very small group of humans that are existing on the outskirts of this little town called Winterville. And it's this little town with a relatively small population. And 3,000 or 4,000 people live there. And for hundreds of years, they've lived pretty peacefully, pretty uninterruptedly there. Last 15 seconds in this single leg forward fold. Last inhale breath, last exhale breath. See if there's any last room available to you. And then eventually we'll walk ourselves up into a seat. Let's extend our left leg. Saddle. And we'll bend the right. Right knee falls out wide, bottom of the right foot comes to that medial side of the left. We take that subtle little rotation. It's not a lot, just enough to get the belly button pointed down. Make sure that the kneecap, the toes, and the femur are all pointed straight up. And then we're headed right down that second side, down the left leg here into this nice single leg fold. Remember, the left knee can bend. The likely emphasis, hamstring, maybe wrapping up into that low back. Over the last few years, there's been a subtle shift in Winterville. The attitudes of the residents have become a little bit more fearful. And the leadership of the town is capitalized on that fear. And it is the new leadership of the town of Winterville that has caused this small group of people, about 20-ish, that number fluctuates from time to time, to leave the town and develop this little camp. A lot of the time in this camp is spent just keeping things warm, keeping the fire going, collecting firewood, splitting firewood, and the like. Last 15 seconds here on side 2. And with that last breath, really think about filling, expanding the lung space, and settling into the depth available in the exhale. And then we'll walk ourselves back to seat, extend the right leg, rebend the knees so that we can interlock or grab and connect to opposite arms. And then we are headed back into a similar version of fold. Now, you may note, you possibly could notice that there's more space available and that the legs have to be extended out a little further to create the same amount of impact. If that's the case, you can wiggle those heels forward. And if that's not the case, don't wiggle the heels forward just for the sake of wiggling the heels forward. We're looking for the maximum impact in our body. So put yourself in a position to receive that or create that. So from time to time, this group of outsiders gets word about the intergoings, the inner happenings of Winterville. And those reports seem to be constantly getting worse. We're going to give ourselves 60 more seconds here. People of Winterville, in the latest report, seem to be being told by their leadership that the outside world is falling apart. That anything beyond the borders of Winterville itself is becoming a violent and dangerous place. When you're right, when you're ready, we're walking ourselves up into seat. Let's make sure we have our blanket, towel, and if you have a blocker book, that as well handy. And then we're going to head on to our backs. Really feeling that upper back space that we've activated as you settle here. And because of this, and we're just settling here, right? We're just settling into that sensation on the backside of the body. Arms can be wherever's comfortable, legs can be wherever's comfortable. Breath as deep and fluid as you can make it. So, because of this perception that's being spread inside Winterville, the dangers of the world, the dangers of the outside, the community itself starts to make changes. They forbid light when the sun goes down. No more candles are used to light the homes. And they do this so that they don't draw attention to themselves by potentially traveling raiders, thieves. And they build up more and more guards at the gates. When you are ready, let's take the arms to cactus or T if they're not already there. The hands could also theoretically be behind the head. And then the left ankle is going to come on top of the right thigh. And we want to create some good verticalness in that left femur. And then we're going to take the top of the left femur and place it so that the top of the left femur is on the ground roughly, and the bottom of the left foot is roughly pointed towards the ceiling. So you can see, to do this, I'm coming up onto my right tiptoes, but you could also just pull that right foot closer and be more grounded. But there is an adjustment of that right foot to help support this. And this isn't going to be a long thing. This is just kind of a preamble to where we're headed, which is my favorite twist. Eventually, the left foot's going to travel all the way across the body, and the left foot's going to come down. The left foot is planted. The top of the left femur is roughly pointed up towards the ceiling. Top of the left knee pointed up towards the ceiling. Arms are grounded here. And this is about finishing the twist energy that we've built up. Really a deep rotation through the spine. You can also include the cervical spine rotation by turning the gaze to the left, if that feels right. You can also soften the shape pretty significantly by turning the gaze to the right. And as these changes happen within Winterville, there's a very interesting thing that happens within the populace. The more security that is added, the more guards that show up at the gate, the more the lights off at nightfall is enforced, the more the populace becomes fearful and detached from the outside world. When you're right, when you're ready, let's bring that Right knee back up, left foot back to its side of the body. Give yourself a moment, maybe even a bridge, but a moment to settle back into stability. And then the bottoms of the feet are going to come together and the knees are going to fall out wide. And in this unique perpetuating cycle, as the community disengages with that outside of Winterville, and as the populace becomes more fearful of that outside of Winterville, there's a notable decrease in the happiness of the populace. Those things that people used to enjoy doing by candlelight at night are now impossible to do in the darkness of their homes. Those trips people used to take down to the warmer valleys away from the constant snow of Winterville are no longer there to brighten their future prospects. And almost as if they are tied together, as the people of Winterville become less happy, they become more connected to their leadership. The same leadership that's created these new rules, keeping them safe. When you're ready, the knees come back to neutral. And the right ankle is going to cross the left thigh. Top of the right femur is coming down to touch the floor again, making that adjustment with the left foot positioning so that you can get the bottom of the right foot to be as towards the ceiling as feels comfortable for you. And remembering that this is just the warm-up phase. Before we go into the deeper rotation, taking the bottom of the right foot across the body, planting it on the left side, and then trying to get verticalness in the tibia and fibia, kneecap pointing up, top of the femur now pointing roughly up towards the ceiling. This has a lot of hip requirement to it, right? Like oftentimes we're using this as a hip adjustment. And today, certainly we can't avoid the hips being involved, but we're really using this as a more of a finalizing of the rotation that we've started in the spine. So just as the first side, remember that you have the capacity to add by taking the gaze over towards the right side this time. You also have the possibility to lessen by taking the gaze over towards the left side, just depending upon what feels right for you. One day a ruling comes down from the leadership of Winterville that those few members who have left the city and are now living on the outskirts are going to be permanently exiled, banned from entering, from trading, and anyone in communication with them is going to suffer the same fate. And so the entire town is given 24 hours notice that if you are supporting this group on the outskirts, you're going to be punished with imprisonment. And so people have to make choices. You know, some people have family members out there. Some people have been continually, through the goodness of their experience, offering them supplies. And obviously this causes them turmoil within the members on the outskirts as well. They're being cut off. Their supplies are being ended. And this is done right before the harshness of winter, making it even worse. They do end up with a few more members, about 40 total, before the 24-hour time of leniency is ended. And at that point, the gates are closed and Winterville is more or less locked in for the winter. When you feel balanced left to right, we're going to bring our right leg back across. The right foot comes down to mirror the left. We give ourselves the movement possibility to settle, and then the bottoms of the feet are going to come together and the knees are going to fall out wide once again. So interestingly, the excess people coming to this outcast group aren't exactly greeted with celebration. This group that was 20 now is roughly 40, is looking at their supplies, and it does not look great. And we're making things maybe even worse. The leader of this little outcast group kind of pulled himself away from the members. He's tucked himself into his little sleeping quarters. And he has a bunch of candles surrounding this seed pod floating in a glass of water. And he's writing on these pieces of paper and then tossing them into this little glass vase on his desk. And he's not doing much communication with the members. Eventually, after a few days have passed, he comes out and he tells everyone that they're welcome. He's happy they're here and encourages everyone to help gather more and more firewood. Because he's also looking for abandoned beehives because he wants the wax. It's the beeswax that they use to make their candles. And so everyone sets out into the surrounding forest. When you're right, when you're ready, knees are going to come back to neutral. Your choice here, block or blanket towel folded like a block. And remembering that you want two sides to have an equal amount of density, and for those two sides to be on the left and right side of you, if you're using a blanket or towel, we're going to slide a support underneath a bridge. So lifting the tailbone and then sliding a support underneath that bridge, and then taking your feet out, heel toeing the feet out to the width of the mat, and letting the knees fall in towards one another with this elevation. If that doesn't feel right for your lumbar, you can certainly do this with the spine neutral. But if it's okay for the low back, let's see if we can have some elevation with this little hip deactivation. And if the knees aren't coming all the way together and you have a second prop handy, sliding that second prop in between the knees to lessen the distance needed is a great choice as well. And so this group of outcasts spread out through the forest looking for firewood and with a special mission to find beeswax. And somehow, some way, they end up coming back with a huge haul of beeswax. And they set out making candles. And this leader is setting up little glasses with these seed pods in them, and he's just surrounding these glasses with candles. And soon enough, he has 30 or 40 of these seeds floating in water surrounded by candles. And the candles are keeping this area surprisingly warm. And about 30 days later, one of these seeds has bloomed up into this stalk and blossomed into this huge and beautiful flower. And the leader gathers everyone around and they just admire the beauty of this flower. And that night, they kind of have a little celebration into the wee hours before everyone goes to sleep. And when they wake up the next day, that flower is gone. Not just the flower, though. It's not like the flower bloomed and then naturally went away. The plant is gone. And nobody wants to ask why, because another plant is about to bloom. Last 30 seconds here. And so with this next plant about to bloom, they kick right back into the celebration. And you're just kind of setting this beautiful flower in the middle and surrounding it by more and more candles and celebrating into the wee hours of the night. And then the same thing, when they wake up the next day, that plant, the entirety of that plant is gone. Again, no one asks questions. But interestingly enough, a couple members from the Winterville have left Winterville and joined the outcasts. Their numbers have grown. When you're right, when you're ready. Knees coming back out to the width of the feet, and then the feet and the knees walking in line with the hips, lifting the belt line high enough to slide that block out from underneath you and releasing the tailbone down on the mat. Let's grab our blanket or towel. And from a shelf fold, we are going to roll the blanket or towel. You can unfold once if you want, but shelf fold to roll is going to work just as well. And then maybe unrolling it a third and sliding that roll underneath the neck so that you have this big encouraged distance between the chin and the sternum, and letting your arms fall out towards cactus or T. Letting the legs move to what feels comfortable. Bottoms of the feet can be together, knees can be out wide, legs can be extended, knees can be bent, whatever feels most appropriate. Here, we're really finalizing our twist. Now we're finalizing our twist by realigning and reintegrating the entirety of the spine. From the base of the skull to the bottom of the sacrum. So as you settle, think if there are any lateral movements that need to be made so that you're more aligned, you're more integrated. And keep your breath fully and completely at ease. And so it's not every day, but it's every day, every few days, every week or so, a flower blooms. And when the flower blooms, a celebration is had by the outsiders. And after the celebration, it's the same thing every day. The next morning, the group wakes up and that plant in its entirety is gone. Like it has vanished completely. And no one says anything, no one asks any questions, but they look around. They're looking for evidence of where these glass jars are going, and there's nothing. And they keep going to the leader, and he's planting more seeds or floating more seeds, and more seeds are sprouting, and they're finding more beeswax, and they're building more candles. And more people are leaving Winterville and joining this group. And they're bringing more supplies. And this group is starting to expand exponentially from 40 to 80 to 160. Soon it's like 500 people. And this village is starting to emerge. And when you're ready, we're going to bring our knees back to neutral. Kneecaps point towards the ceiling. Awareness drifts within you. You can slide that prop out from underneath the head if it feels good to do so. And just ask yourself if there's anything you might want, need, or appreciate before Shavasana. If there is, offer that to yourself. If you're in a shape
in which you already feel prepared for stillness, feel free to let that stillness drift in. When word starts to kind of drift out of Winterville that the leaders there are worried, and that worry is causing more security within this city. And this city now has about 2,000 people. And these outcasts have a little more than 2,000 people. And they keep growing more of these flowers. And they keep creating more candles. And they keep having more celebrations. And when you're completely and fully ready for stillness, let your body settle in. And soon enough, there are hundreds and hundreds of these beautiful flowers blooming daily. And just as if before, when there was one, they all disappear after a night of celebration. And now hundreds and hundreds of members of or former residents of Winterville are joining this outskirt community daily until there are only a few hundred people left in Winterville itself. Try to bring some movement to your fingers and your toes. Eventually, this huge group just walks right back into Winterville and takes over their former town. And somebody asks, how it was done. How did they get people to leave this place they obviously love so much they're willing to go back? And the former leader of this, or the leader of this former outskirts group, move it into your wrists, your ankles, your elbows, your knees, your shoulders, your hips. He explains what's been going on. Every night after everyone goes to bed, he's been sneaking into Winterville and he's been planting a vase with a beautiful flower in someone's home. Movement to your neck, your head. Eventually, we utilize that movement to transition from the shape we are in back into the seat. Someone says, seems very risky to put a flower in someone's home. Why go through that, sneaking in past the guards, et cetera, et cetera? He says, well, it's quite simple. Spine gets tall, breath gets fluid, eyes close. He says messages of fear and hate don't resonate with happy people. So I had to spread happiness throughout the town. With your next inhale, we'll bring our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you find ways to spread your flowers of happiness and see how that impacts your experience? Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Sunday, guys. Love the heck out of you. Have a beautiful rest of your day today. I'll be back tomorrow night. If you want to move, we'll do this recharge thing again next Sunday. If I don't see you tomorrow, have a beautiful week. Love the heck out of you. Wow.